My friends, history teaches us that every generation witnesses a shift in power, moments when new nations rise, not by accident, but by the force of their people's dreams. Today, as we stand in 2025, the rise of India is not just another headline. It is a story shaking the very foundations of global power. And make no mistake, it is a story that some in the West view not with celebration, but with fear. My friends, when we talk about the rise of India in 2025, we cannot begin anywhere else but with the sheer economic transformation that has taken place. For decades, the story of global growth was told through the lens of the United States, Western Europe, or at times China. But today, India has stepped onto the stage as one of the fastest growing major economies in the world. And it hasn't happened by chance. It has happened because of ambition, because of resilience, because of a vision that stretches across 1 billion people who are determined to carve out their future. Now, for many years, India was described as a country of potential. The phrase was used so often it became a cliché. Potential meant a massive young population. Potential meant a vibrant democracy. Potential meant the promise of markets yet to be tapped. But in 2025, that potential has turned into performance. India has built not only one of the most dynamic technology sectors in the world, but also a thriving startup ecosystem, a manufacturing base that rivals some of the largest economies, and a digital infrastructure that connects rural villages to global networks. Think about that for a moment. Millions of young men and women logging onto the same platforms, building businesses, exchanging ideas, shaping the economy of tomorrow. That is not just growth, it is transformation. And here's why this matters. The West has long relied on being the center of innovation and industry. But today, some of the most cutting-edge advancements in artificial intelligence, renewable energy, biotechnology, and space exploration are coming from India. Indian engineers are designing the software that powers global corporations. Indian scientists are sending missions into space at a fraction of the cost. Indian entrepreneurs are reimagining how to deliver healthcare, education, and financial services not just to the wealthy, but to the poor, the rural, and the forgotten. That creates a new kind of economic power, not concentrated in the hands of a few, but spread across the lives of millions who are rising together. For the West, this is unsettling because when you've grown used to setting the rules of the global economy, when you've benefited from being the hub of capital and commerce, the idea of another nation stepping into that role can feel like a threat. And yet, this isn't simply about competition, it's about a shift in the balance of influence. The world is no longer looking only to New York, London, or Berlin for leadership. Increasingly, it is looking to Mumbai, to Bengaluru, to New Delhi. It is listening to voices that come from outside the traditional centers of power. And when that happens, the old order begins to tremble. There's another reason this rise feels like an earthquake. India's economy is not just growing, it is inclusive in ways that challenge the Western model. In many Western economies, inequality has widened, the gap between the wealthy and the working class has grown, and the promise of opportunity feels distant. But in India, the story being written is one where hundreds of millions are being lifted into the middle class, where access to digital platforms allows small businesses to thrive, where renewable energy projects create jobs while protecting the planet. That model doesn't just compete with the West, it offers an alternative vision of what economic progress can look like. Of course, the West understands what is at stake, because economic power isn't just about money, it's about influence. Whoever drives innovation drives the agenda. Whoever controls trade routes shapes diplomacy. Whoever commands the energy markets decides the terms of growth. And right now, India is rewriting those terms. It is leading in green technology, producing the engineers that fuel Silicon Valley, and negotiating trade deals that reflect its own interests, not someone else's design. So, when we say that India's economic rise terrifies the West, it's not simply because of the numbers. It's because this growth tells a story of independence, of self-determination, of a people who are no longer content to play a supporting role in the global economy. It tells a story of a nation that is no longer waiting to be invited to the table, because it is already building a new table where others will have to come and sit. And my friends, that is the reality of 2025. The rise of India is not a whisper of what might be. It is the thunder of what already is. My friend, the rise of India cannot be measured only in terms of economic growth, as powerful as that story is. Because beyond the numbers, beyond the charts and statistics, there is something even more profound happening. It is a shift in power, a rebalancing of influence across the globe. And make no mistake, this is what truly unsettles the West. For centuries, global leadership was defined by Western alliances, Western institutions, Western rules. But in 2025, India is no longer content to be a silent observer of that order. It is becoming a central architect of a new one. For a long time, India was seen as a partner to the West, an ally when convenient, a democracy that could fit neatly into Western narratives. But today, India has stepped out of that narrow role. It is forging its own path, building bridges with nations across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. These are regions that for too long felt left behind by Western-led globalization. And when India extends its hand, offering not just trade but partnership, not just investment but respect, it resonates. Because these nations see in India a country that knows what it means to struggle against colonialism, to rise from poverty, to demand dignity on the world stage. That experience carries weight. It gives India credibility in ways the West cannot replicate. Think about the symbolism of what we are witnessing. Nations of the global South are no longer waiting for Western powers to dictate the agenda. They are turning to India for leadership. They are asking India to speak on issues of climate justice, of equitable trade, of digital sovereignty. And India is answering. It is not trying to replace one empire with another. Instead, it is saying the world must work in balance, not in dominance. That message, simple as it may sound, is revolutionary. Now, consider what this means for the West. Institutions like the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, these were built largely by Western vision to serve Western interests. But India is pushing back, demanding reforms, demanding that these bodies reflect the voices of billions who were excluded when they were first created. Imagine the fear this sparks in capitals like Washington, London, or Brussels, where leaders are used to controlling the conversation. Suddenly, they find themselves facing a nation that will not quietly accept the old rules, a nation that has the power of the population and the partnerships to rewrite them, and the partnerships matter. Look at how India is redefining diplomacy. It is strengthening its ties with Southeast Asia, investing in Africa's infrastructure, building energy corridors in the Middle East, and expanding trade across Latin America. These are not small gestures. They are deliberate steps toward creating a network of allies that stand outside the shadow of Western dominance. And when those networks begin to crystallize, they form a counterbalance, a new pole of power in the world. That, my friends, is what we mean by geopolitical rebalancing. There's also a psychological dimension to this. For decades, the story of world affairs was framed as a contest between the West and whichever rival rose to challenge it. Whether it was the Soviet Union or later China, but India complicates that narrative. It is not trying to impose a single ideology. It is not seeking to dominate through military bases or coercion. Instead, it presents itself as a democracy, as a diverse and pluralistic society as a voice of reason in a polarized world that makes it harder for the West to paint India as an adversary, yet even more dangerous to the established order, because India's leadership appeals not through fear, but through aspiration. And so here we are in 2025, watching the world shift before our eyes. Western leaders may still speak of alliances, of maintaining order, of defending democracy. But beneath those words lies a growing unease, because the reality is that India is no longer standing in line behind them. It is charting its own course, and by doing so, inspiring others to do the same. The monopoly on global leadership that the West once held is slipping, not with the sound of confrontation, but with the quiet, steady voice of a nation that knows its time has come. That, my friends, is why India's rise terrifies the West, because it changes the very balance of power itself. My friends, when we talk about why India's rise terrifies the West, it is not enough to speak of economics or geopolitics alone. Because beneath the trade deals and the alliances lies something deeper, something that cannot be measured by GDP or military strength. It is the story of a nation that has refused to let its identity be defined by someone else. It is the story of a civilization that stands tall, proud of its history, confident in its culture, and unafraid to shape the future on its own terms. That, perhaps more than anything else, is what unsettles the West. For generations, Western nations projected not only power but values, telling the world what progress should look like, what governance should mean, how societies should organize themselves, and many countries, whether by choice or by pressure, accepted that framework. But India has said, quietly and firmly, that it will not conform to a vision of the future written somewhere else. It will not abandon its traditions to be accepted, nor dilute its identity to be welcomed. Instead, it has chosen to embrace its diversity, its languages, its faiths, its philosophies, and carry them forward as sources of strength rather than burdens to be shed. Now, think about how powerful that is. In a world where globalization often seemed to flatten differences, where success was measured by how closely a nation mirrored Western systems, India is proving that success can be achieved differently. It can be rooted in heritage, it can draw from spirituality, it can celebrate culture instead of discarding it. And when billions of people see that example, when they see that it is possible to rise without surrendering who you are, it challenges the very notion that Western values alone define the future. Consider the influence of India's cultural power. Its films are watched in Africa, its music is heard in Europe, its food is celebrated on every continent, and its diaspora carries its traditions into the heart of every major city in the world. These are not small things. They are reminders that India's identity is not confined within its borders. It travels, it inspires, it connects, and it does so not by imposition, but by attraction. That is soft power at its finest, and it is power the West cannot easily compete with because it comes not from force, but from authenticity. But there's more. India's rise is also ideological in the sense that it offers a different way of imagining democracy. In the West, democracy has often been presented as a rigid model, one system, one formula, one way to organize power. India shows something more complex, more chaotic, but also more resilient. It is a democracy that holds together countless faiths and ethnicities, that manages disagreements not by silencing them, but by allowing them to coexist. That messiness, that pluralism, is not a weakness, it is a reflection of the human story itself. And when nations in Africa or Asia look at India, they see proof that democracy can exist outside the Western mold, that it can be shaped by local realities and still thrive. This is the real challenge for the West. Because if India's cultural and ideological rise continues, then Western influence no longer has a monopoly on defining what is modern, what is democratic, what is advanced, And when you lose that monopoly, you lose the ability to dictate terms, not just politically or economically, but morally. That is the kind of shift that terrifies those who have grown accustomed to writing the rules. And let us be clear, India is not rising against the West. It is not trying to replace one form of dominance with another. What India is doing is standing as itself, an ancient civilization in a modern world, unafraid to bring its values, its traditions, its stories into the global conversation. And in doing so, it invites others to do the same. That invitation, that example, is what makes the West so uneasy. Because if more nations find the courage to stand in their own identity, then the world is no longer shaped by a single narrative. It becomes multipolar not just in power, but in meaning. So yes, the West may look at India and see numbers, see markets, see military strength. But beneath all of that, what truly terrifies them is a nation that refuses to apologize for who it is, a nation that proves there is more than one way to lead, more than one way to rise, more than one way to define the future. And that, my friends, is the power of India's story in 2025. My friends, when we look at the rise of India in 2025, we see more than just the growth of a nation. We see a transformation of the global order. We see an economy that is no longer waiting for permission to lead, but already shaping the future of technology and trade. We see a geopolitical force that is building bridges across continents, refusing to be bound by the old rules of dominance and hierarchy. And we see a culture, a civilization, a people standing tall in their own identity, proving to the world that progress does not require surrender, that leadership does not require imitation. This is why India's rise terrifies the West, because it represents change, deep, lasting, undeniable change. But here's the truth: history does not belong to those who cling to fear. History belongs to those who embrace the future with courage. And in that future, India is not a shadow, not a follower, not a supporting character. India is a central force, a voice for billions, a beacon of possibility. So let us understand this moment for what it is. Not the end of one world, but the beginning of another, a world that is richer in perspective, broader in vision, and stronger because of India's rise. That is the story of 2025. That is the story of tomorrow.